We'll call the work session to order. Madam Clerk, would you read the roll?
Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Morrissey.
Here.
Mr. Schimpf.
Here.
Mrs. Klein.
Here.
Mr. Amos. Mr. Schmidt.
Here.
Mrs. Jewin.
Here.
Motion to approve the agenda is proposed.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we have on the agenda the Youth Violence Intervention Initiative submitted by Chief Trelka. So take it away.
Yeah, Dan Trelka, Chief of Police. Over the past 9 years, we've made significant progress in driving our crime rate down, about 32%. The one crux, the one problem we're having is shootings. We'll have about 100 shootings per year in the city, and the past couple of weeks are a good example of that. The vast majority of our shootings are gang members within our community. We do performance evaluations, annual evaluations at the police department, and one officer 18 months ago had on his evaluation a solution to confronting these problems. It in essence was getting involved in the lives of these kids. What's sad is we can accurately predict. I can take you between my school resource officers and teachers, we can accurately predict who's prone to join a gang in the city of Waterloo. And this officer realized that on his evaluation, he wanted to start a nonprofit to address this. He did start a nonprofit. It's taken off. It's gotten the attention of the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's gotten the attention of the school district. And he's raised $170,000 to run programming so that we can get involved in the lives of these generally young men and disrupt this cycle of violence that they tend to engage in by joining a gang and engaging in acts of violence. This is a proven program. It's been used in Sioux City over the past 20 years, and it's proven to be successful. The University of Northern Iowa has been assisting him. They've jumped on board with their mentors in violence prevention programming. Quite simply, I'm here to get a feel from the council to add another officer without utilizing any general funds to add that officer. We're at a sworn level right now of 123 officers. We are currently 3 officers short, and quite simply, we're running ragged. Months, years ago, I've told the council, if I come back to you and ask for officers, I will find a way to fund those officers. We have a way now. If we take this money that he has earmarked and is being pushed toward him, we could start him in this program, or start an officer in this program September 1st, and the funds would run out in January, where we stand right now. But one component of this officer's job duties would be to garner funding for this outside the general funds to continue the program. Worst case scenario, if we can't get the funds, I've got continual openings in the police department due to retirements over the next year, year and a half. We simply wouldn't fill a position if the funding dries up. But this came together quickly. This officer even talked about retiring from the police department so he could run his nonprofit. He's so committed to this. And I talked him out of it because it'd be foolish for him to walk away from a pension that he's put the city in. He has contributed 9 years of his life toward. I thought this was the best way to proceed right now. So I wanted to have this work session so I could answer any of your questions, get a feel from the council if you're willing to let us do this. But we've got a significant problem in the community now with violence being committed amongst our young men. And we found a solution that we're confident can address this. And I just want to see the council endorse and support this.
Mr. Mayor. So, Chief, that means that essentially you're going to move from 123 positions to 124. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor. I want to make sure I understood you. You've gotten funding from this nonprofit in the amount of?
He has $170,000 from 2 different grant sources And I believe both of sources are coming through juvenile court services. In addition, we have a meeting next week, myself, the mayor, Dr. Heisterkamp, with some other nonprofits that provide funding for these. But I'm optimistic we can garner even more money. We've got $35,000 earmarked for the officer's position, and it'll be funded through the nonprofit the officer has started.
But you said it would start in September, and did I understand you correctly, it would end in January?
If we cannot find any additional funding, it would end in January.
So if you don't find any more funding, that's when you would switch it over to filling a vacancy that was already approved?
We would not fill a vacancy. We have Captain Crow's going to retire, Lieutenant Campbell's going to retire, all within the next year. So we have vacancies, known vacancies occurring. Like I said, with the worst case scenario, if the non-general fund funding for this position dries up, we drop back down to 123. We don't lay anybody off. We simply don't fill a position.
Okay. And you say this program has been in effect for 20 years and has proven to be effective?
Yes, and the nonprofit in Sioux City is the Sanford Center. They haven't established a specific name for this nonprofit yet. We were going to call it the Sanford Center of Waterloo, but the board is playing with some other names. I'm a member of the board. I'm the treasurer of the board, but there is a board for the nonprofit, and we just want to tackle this problem and make a difference. Like I said, the crux of our crime problem right now in Waterloo is gunfire, shots fired, crimes of violence such as this.
Yes, Chief Trelka. So this would be an ongoing position. You wouldn't see it being terminated or anything like that?
If we run out of funding, we would have to find another way to run the program. The program probably would be in jeopardy if the funding dries up for the position. But this is garnering so much attention, I'm confident we're going to be able to find funding sources outside the general fund to sustain it.
So you would like to see this as an annual appropriation so that this position, this concept, this program was kept in effect?
Yes.
On an ongoing basis. So.
Yes, and again, one of the responsibilities, one of the duties of the officer that runs these programs will be to find funding that's outside the general fund to maintain the position.
Okay, and would this be a position in the bargaining unit?
Yes.
Okay, and what would the title or rank be for that?
Violence Reduction Officer, VRO. And he would, he or she would be supervised by our school resource sergeant, because it goes hand in hand with our vision with the school resource program.
So this person would have the same kind of requirements that any other officer would have that joined the Waterloo Police Department?
Yes.
Okay.
And the one thing that's really hurting us right now is all the overtime that's being generated. So it helps simply to have another body that we can draw from for our overtime if we need to protect the crime scene or whatever. Because right now we're in a situation where we're forced. In the past, officers, it would be easy to find officers to voluntarily work a crime scene or protect the crime scene. Now we're forcing officers to do it because we're just having so many incidents in the recent past 2-3 weeks. So it'd be nice to have another body, another person to throw into that pool.
Okay. And I mean, in the last year here, we've been talking about, and the council's passed different things having to do with automatic traffic enforcement and speed issues. And then we got on the agenda tonight the thing about the municipal citations versus the other way, the old way that we've been doing it. Would any of those dollars be diverted into this position at some point in time if necessary?
To be quite frank with you, I would like to do that at some point. Rely upon those non-general fund dollars to assist in programming like this.
Okay. And one other thing, I know that you have the Domestic Abuse Response Team, or DART, and that involves police officers, but I think you draw in other people within the other professions.
Yes.
in that team. Would that kind of concept be part of this too, where other professions might be brought in to supplement what your officer's doing?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we've recently started a task force that was initiated by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And the goal of this task force is to hold the worst of the worst accountable in our community, but also they were looking for identifiable programming we could also utilize to have an impact on the youth in our community before they engage in criminal behavior. So it goes hand in hand with that. And the different members on this task force are DHS, the U.S. Attorney's Office, probation and parole. I don't want to reveal too much about this task force yet because the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to have a news conference on it on June 7th.
Okay.
But this would be one component of that task force.
Okay, thank you.
Schmidt.
Mr. Mayor, Chief, I'm still a little bit confused. You mentioned you had an officer that a year ago came up with this idea.
Yes.
And what was that idea?
He wanted to start a nonprofit to have an impact, disrupt the evolution of a youth in our community getting to a point where they join a gang and engage in violence in our community.
Okay. And then there's been $170,000 raised?
Yes, $170,000 thus far has come to his nonprofit. I believe all of it through JCS, but through two different sources to provide programming to youth in our community who've been identified as having a great potential of becoming gang members.
So is that money being spent now? Or is it sitting in a fund, or where's that
It's
money at?
basically sitting in a fund
Okay,
under the control of the board for the nonprofit.
okay. But we can't use any of that money for this position that you're talking about, is that
We can
correct?
use $35,000,
But only $35,000.
correct, at this point.
And why is that?
Those are the grant specifics.
You know, in the years that you and I have been here, we've had police departments from, I can't remember if it was Charlotte, someplace in North Carolina, came to town and spent several days. We either had people come here from Racine, Wisconsin, or we went there. I don't remember the exact
Both.
nature of that, yeah. And I guess I'm not sure I know what the results of either one of those were. That now in Sioux City's got the answer, and they've had it for 20 years. And I mean, I'm just kind of scratching my head trying to figure out what were we doing in North Carolina, what we were doing in Racine, if Sioux City's got the answers. I don't know if you watch much TV, but on Netflix, there's a program called Flint Town, and it's about Flint, Michigan. And that's a town that has gone from 200,000 down to 100,000 population because of what's happened there with General Motors. And their police department has gone from 300 officers down to 90 some. And they're continuing to police that community of 100,000 with 90 some officers. And so the only reason I mention that is that it just seems like we keep looking for more money to do stuff. We keep spending more money to do stuff, but we're not getting the results we want. I'm a little bit concerned, and I'm absolutely supportive of our Waterloo Police Department. I'm a little bit concerned about hiring a police officer that part of his job is going to be trying to access grants. I thought we had grant writers.
No, we don't.
I thought we had Intercog that we hired for writing grants. I mean, this just seems to me to be not a good use of that person's time, just as a business model perspective. And then the other thing, you know, talking about the overtime, you and I have had many conversations about your overtime budget. With some of the non-lethal, non-threatening, non-violent activities the police department does, wouldn't that be an opportunity to get more of our reserve officers that maybe can't be left alone or are not completely certified to do some of that stuff where it's not violence imminent?
It's a different era, Mr. Schmidt. We couldn't even get the reserves to come work the 4th Street crews. It's difficult to generate bodies to engage in some of the duties that we engage in. In regard to the other programs, we know what's best for Waterloo. I've been here, I started my 9th year and have an incredibly proven, successful track record. What may work for Racine may not work for Waterloo. And we realize that our problems tend to, in Racine, their problems were more ingrained in a geographical area. In Waterloo, they move around quite a bit. One solution we had that positively impacts that is our chronic nuisance property ordinance, which has been incredibly successful with these crime problems that are like amoebas that move around. The cop houses, that was not a good solution for Waterloo because that house is built in that, or that house is acquired in that neighborhood. And if that problem moves on, then we're stuck with a house there that somebody has to maintain. Some of the suggestions from North Carolina, we evaluated them, looked at them. The most we took out of that was programs to engage with the youth of our community. Their programs are supported with their tax base. I don't want to utilize using our tax base to support this program.
And they also had an entire youth diversion office within their police department because they believed that engaging youth with some of the behaviors that the chief indicated was one of the best ways that you can change some of the behaviors that they're seeing. They also had an innumerable amount of partnerships that they had within the community. So when we take a look, one of the things they had there was the Police Foundation, and it was a way to be able to garner and gather resources that support police activities or community policing activities, things right here. We have one now. They also had informational cards when they're talking to residents and their interaction. We gave that out here. They also went directly back into some of the community policing, going and talking to the barbershops and establishing relations, Operation Public Safety, but it was hands-on. So I can't say that we didn't get anything from there, but there's no amount of places that we can't go across this state, across this country, when it comes to protecting the lives of our young people, when it comes to fighting crime. If that's what we need to do, to go out there and find information, and if we had a chief that didn't go out there and do that, then we would have a problem right here. That's exactly what we need to be doing, looking at every angle, under every bush. And if it is somewhere in Iowa that has it, then we need to go out there and get it, because things are different than they were when I grew up, and we need to be proactive in doing that. Mrs. Juwan had a question, and Mrs. Klein, and we got to close up.
Yeah, just a quick question. You said this foundation just started a year and a half ago, but Sioux City's been doing it for 20 years. Is our local one just the raising of the funds, and then they happen to find the program in Sioux City's, which is where they're going to spend the funds on the program? I'm a little confused there. As far as it's just a year and a half old, but we're incorporating a program that's been around for 20 years. What's the difference there?
Well, we actually discovered the program in Sioux City about 3 years ago, but had no way to implement it, no funding.
Okay.
So I turned Officer Brandt onto that program, had him look at it. Mentors in Violence Prevention, which is associated with UNI, is heavily involved in that program. They evaluated it, and it's proven, it's shown promise, it's shown effectiveness, and we all determined that this would be a good program for Waterloo.
So basically what we're doing locally is creating a foundation to raise the funds to participate in that program.
Yes, and have somebody locally coordinate it and provide the programming. But it takes money to provide programming.
Sure.
Mrs. Klein, and then we'll move on to our
questions. The numbers in Sioux City back this all up?
They do, yes.
It's going down?
Yes, and I noticed, about 12 years ago, Sioux City's crime rate was dropping, and I didn't know why. And once I came to Iowa 8 years ago, I discovered why. It appears to be because of this programming that they're utilizing.
My next question is, since $35,000 can be taken out for this position, what's the rest of the money going to be used for?
Good question. Programming. Officer Brandt wanted all the money to be used for programming, but I told him, how much can we use for a program to, or a position to support it?
And he's working with kids and young people right now. I mean, maybe we all need to go and take a look and see exactly how it's working to try to change the lives of young people. But that's the end for this portion of the work session. Thank you so much. I don't have a pulse right now. So
I think it sounds good.
if he can come up with some other uses of, find some other dollars to help. Yes, ma'am.
Can I tell you why I like it? Because he's not asking for any money, and that means we get to try it out, see if it shows real promise here in our Waterloo streets, and then make that decision down the road.
Absolutely. All right. So it is 4:50, so I think you have a charge.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Next, we have an update on the Five Sullivan Brothers Convention Center. We'll, Noel, did you want to start us out real quickly? And then we have a special guest with us this evening, Mr. Leslie. So just a couple minutes. Let Noel.
Noel Anderson, Community Planning Development Director. As you may recall, back in July of 2017, we did enter into a development agreement with a hotel improvements and with the convention center improvements. Those two agreements were attached to each other so that the performances in both would both need to be met to keep them both effective. Just a quick review on the projects at hand before we turn the floor over to Mr. Leslie. For the hotel agreement, there was a PowerPoint that I can send to you if you want to see that again. Otherwise, the bullet points on that for the hotel agreement where they're going to purchase the hotel, they're going to invest approximately $14 million into the hotel, sign a minimum assessment agreement at $10 million until the year 2058, sign an agreement with a timeline to be finished with the improvements before, and there was a date on here. It's actually in the agreement 18 months after conveyance or 18 months after the agreement is approved, whichever is last. They pay for the parking ramp at 200 spots reserved for them at rates determined by the city policy. They will hire no fewer than 100 employees for staffing of the hotel and convention center together. They must maintain a 4-diamond rating hotel on the site for the term of the agreement. In exchange for that, the city of Waterloo would have rebates from the added value above the current value of $1.617 million. Rebates at 20 years at 85%. Estimated value of the rebates is $4.3 million over 20 years. And a return of hotel motel revenue above the base of $125,000 per year for 20 years at 100%. The estimated value of that was $2.3 million over a 15-year period. For the convention center agreement, they would upgrade and renovate the facility at an estimated minimum cost of $6 million. They would pay for parking at the ramp with 200 spots reserved for them as rates determined by the city policy. They would sign the agreement with a timeline to start within 6 months and be finished within 18 months of the approval of the agreement. They signed the minimum assessment agreement at $5 million until the year 2049. 100 jobs created between hotel and the convention center. Escrow account at 4% or $100,000 minimum for maintenance and improvements per year. 4-star hotel standard required. The name will be the Waterloo Convention Center at 5 Sullivan Brothers Plaza. In exchange for that, the city would convey the convention center for $1, including the skywalk. A grant of $700,000 after exterior improvements planned, approved by the design build management team and building official. A grant of $350,000 after the interior improvements completed. City to not give incentives to another event center over 10,000 square feet for 10 years. Must maintain a convention center unless city gives consent to change the use. If company changes use without consent, the property reverts back to the city. Rebates paid from added value above the current value of $2.5 million. Rebates at 15 years at 34%, estimated value $355,000. Review board comprised of 2 city staff, convention and visitors director, Main Street director, WDC member, a representative of a large convention user, and Leslie hospitality member to annually walk through facility and review comments back from users, and a repurchase on the sliding scale and city approval of any sale in the agreement. That was the basis of the 2 agreements that was signed back in July.
Okay, questions of Noel?
I do. Is the city in compliance with everything they promised to
Yes,
do?
we are.
You are.
Madam,
Mr. Anderson, I'd appreciate a copy of that PowerPoint.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
This question would be for Noel, or might even be for Michelle. So over the past, if we started that, if that development agreement took place, and maybe you touched on it or I didn't catch it, if that took place back in July, since then, there's been 3 hotel motel tax payouts from the state. There was actually just one that occurred 5 days ago. And so what that comes out to be in our city ordinances is that 20% of those monies are supposed to go to the convention center. So that comes out to a total, after all of that, of a little over $200,000 that should essentially be given to the convention center if it was under us. So where has that $200,000 gone, and what is the plan moving forward for that ordinance?
Michelle Wiedner, Chief Financial Officer, that those payments are deposited to the Convention Center maintenance activity, which you would have in the budget and we've approved in the budget. We do hope to change that once we get to closing, but we can't change it while we still own the facility because we need a maintenance budget while we still own the facility.
Good.
Yes, ma'am.
No. May I ask one question? It said that this was supposed to be in effect 6 months after this agreement was signed, and then they had 18 months to complete it. So that would have been January 17th, right? That the 6 months was up, since this was signed July 17th.
January of 18.
I'm sorry, yes. 18.
And that would have been in the convention center agreement. They would have had till January of 18 to take out permits.
Right.
I think they have done a little bit of work, and we have continued to make improvements to it as well. The 18 months is probably the more critical one where they would have to be done, which would be January of 19.
And title has not been conveyed.
That is correct.
And is there a reason for that?
We're waiting for Mr. Leslie to say he is ready to set up the closing.
And work has begun.
I think they've done some improvements. We've continued to do some maintenance over there. Mr. Leslie can probably better answer that.
The reason I'm puzzled by this is one time when my husband and I sold our big family house, 2 hours before we closed, a company pulled up, crawled up on our roof, and started throwing the bricks to the fireplace off. And we had not conveyed title. And so I went out and said, I think you need to stop. I don't think our insurance would cover any incident with you. Is there a problem with insurances? Is there a problem with who's paying whom?
I think we're covered. There was an early use entry agreement that was given to Leslie Hospitality to go in there and do some changes themselves, and there's an indemnity clause in that agreement. So we should be covered for them to do some things in there in cooperation with us.
And the city expects to close when?
That's what we're hoping to hear from Mr. Leslie.
Mr. Leslie, welcome.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and council members. Listening to the questions, I have a lot of answers, so I'm not sure where you want to start. I'll give you an update currently on the financing structure and status. I did update the city's chief financial officer with some information to use from that perspective. We have approval from our bank in Illinois for the financing for the project. The issue that became is that they had a maximum limit of what they could do within the Waterloo and Iowa market based on their restrictions. So they reached out to local lenders and local banks to actually find somebody to supplement the difference and as well be the lead bank because of the licensing and permitting and things of that nature. Right now, there are 2 banks that they're actually working with to finalize that portion of it. We anticipate that being done probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I have actually confidentially provided to the city's chief financial officer and city attorney copies of documents so that they have that to see what's transpiring in that process. Additionally, my firm engaged HFF, which is one of the largest New York investment banking firms, to supplement the financing for what we need to get the project moving forward. And recently, in the last week, we have closed on an $18 million refinance structure on part of our financing with HFF and Ladder Capital out of New York. I also provided Ms. Wiedner with a copy of those documents to show that we just acquired the $18 million in financing from Ladder Capital as well. So from a financial wherewithal and capability standpoint, we don't really have any issues. The one thing that I would correct on some of the statements, and not correct Noel, but just to clarify a couple of comments, is there's a little bit of difference between opinion of when the actual documents were signed, stating July versus later, because we came back to council and modified them. So there were signings and then changes. So there's a little bit of time difference there. Secondarily to that, to answer one of your questions, Ms. Councilman Klein, is we officially actually have a legal permit to do construction. So we are fully in compliance with the requirements of the development agreement, because the changes we're making to the convention center that we've actually started on are fully permitted by the city's permit and engineering department. So by having that permit, we have 18 months from the date the permit, which was issued in, I want to say either January, February, I'm not sure the exact date, but we would have 18 months from that date to complete the construction of the improvements relative to the convention center itself. In terms of insurance costs and expenses, we're paying 100% of the insurance costs, including the insurance on the convention center, and as well indemnifying the city against anything that's being done, and liability on the convention center from the standpoint of guest use. And as well, we pay all of the utilities, water, gas, electric, everything related to the convention center. Mr. Shrimp, relative to the funding that you're questioning relative to where the tax money is going, it's still going to the city. It still remains property of the city. It doesn't come to us. Our expenses are our expenses, and your expenses are your expenses. There are still things right now that are being done to the convention center by the city that you're obligated to do and repair that are still your obligations, but general repairs and ongoing repairs that we're doing in terms of long-term stuff we're paying for ourselves. So that's kind of my short version of the update on where we're at. I will tell you that we're getting exemplary feedback from the community from a standpoint of events that are being held. We have probably, for the next 2 to 3 years, booked 3 times the amount of dollar value of business for the convention center and the hotel that it's ever seen in the last 5 years. So from a standpoint of tax revenue, that's going to have extremely good implications for the city as well as the hotel and convention center. So good questions.
I have a couple. How much is the difference that you were talking about between the bank in Illinois and the difference? They could only loan you so much, and then
the difference is $3 million.
$3 million of the $6 million that you need.
Well, the $6 million is the minimum. Our request is for a whole lot more than $6 million. So our request from the bank in Illinois was actually $12.8 million. So there's a difference between $3 million of what they can do and what we're asking for.
Okay. My follow-up question is, and you said there was a little discrepancy in which the actual date was that the agreement was signed?
Well, I don't necessarily think that there's a discrepancy in the date. We all know what date it was signed. Discrepancy in when the start date is and what that date actually is. I think there might be a little difference between the July date and what I think is a later date, but it's not really a discrepancy. It's actually a firm document. So whatever the document says is what it, I just don't necessarily believe that it might not be July 31st.
Okay, 31st. Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Schmidt?
So I'm not sure this is a question for you or Noel, but what is the date on the document?
It was July 17th, and then there was an amendment on August 28th.
Didn't you say January?
I said we were permitted in January, Councilman.
Oh, okay. So is August the date, or is July the date, or what is the date?
Probably go by the amended date, which would be the August date.
Okay. And then also you mentioned currently, you're paying some of the expenses and the city's paying some of the expenses. Did I understand that correctly?
I believe we're paying probably, what, 95% of the expenses? The only thing that we're not paying are major repairs. For instance, right now we've been going through a process of doing items that are necessary to become in compliance with the fire marshal's report. And something similar to that was there was some severe damage to some of the sidewalks and steps that had to be repaired. The city actually had to make those repairs, whereas, you know, if there's lighting that needs repaired, day-to-day use type items, we're repairing those.
Okay. And the fire marshal during this conversation, wasn't there like a couple $1 million worth of repairs that need to be made to get us caught up with fire marshal? Does that ring a bell, or am I thinking of something else?
I don't have that number in front of me. There was, the main thing was some exit doors that we were working on. I want to say that there was 4 groups of them, and they were estimated between 15 to 25,000 per grouping. So it was a lot less than $1 million, but
Yeah.
that was the main issue on there.
And then since July or August or whenever you started managing the property, since then, you've taken all the income from the facility, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just say that I add to your comments. I'm hearing lots of good things about what's happening at the hotel and the convention center. That the food is much better. So congratulations and thank you for that. Using your crystal ball, when do you think it'll be signed? Come on.
Well, I don't know that I want to give you a date. I did that already, and it backfired with me and Ms. Klein here. Unfortunately, using my crystal ball, I would tell you that I think that we're within 8 to 9 weeks, somewhere in that range. If I could push that further or push it faster, I will. Part of what happened, and Michelle can attest to this a little bit because she's, we kind of kept her in the loop as far as what's been going on with this, is that we started down the road of having complete board approval from the bank. And, a week later, the executive vice president of the bank got fired. So it kind of set us back 3 weeks while the bank regrouped trying to figure out what they were doing. So that created a little bit of a hurdle. So, it's little things like that I could say, okay, well, we're there, we're going to get there, and we're going to get this done. But to give myself that little leeway, that's kind of why I'm saying it's a little longer.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Morrison.
Yes, the hotel, that's a done deal. You're going ahead with that and the remodeling and that, Mr. Leslie?
We're going ahead with both projects simultaneously, correct?
Oh, they're going to do them together?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
we're making improvements to the hotel as we go currently as well. So, we've already started work on the hotel as well. There's things that are being done there as well.
Well, bravo. Thank you.
It needs a lot of work.
Shemp, you got a question?
No, mine was answered.
I think you have one more.
Well, I do. And the reason I started contacting the city about the closing date was because I was receiving an awful lot of calls, especially after the larger events. The state pool league champion, or whatever it is, the pool league.
Pool and
thing.
dart.
Yes. I received several calls after that. And we learn from good comments, and we also learn from challenging ones. And these were particularly challenging for the convention center. And I told them that I would look into where we were in that progress. And so I hope you take the good and the challenging, because that's the way people grow and do better.
Oh, absolutely, and I do. To address, like, if you don't mind, I'd like to address those comments relative to pool and dart and some of these groups. I think that what happens is that you get tidbits of information, and you hear, there may be 3,000 people attending an event, and as we all know in today's world, 10 people will comment, 2,990 won't have anything to say because they're happy with what happened. The 10 who are going to be upset may be very loud or very vocal about their opinions. But also what happened with pool and dart is there was a lot of rumor going around of changes that we were going to make to the convention center. And we were also up against the fact that the Cedar Rapids Convention Center and the city of Cedar Rapids had offered the pool and dart tournament thousands of dollars of incentives to leave the city of Waterloo and come to Cedar Rapids. Okay, so we have been constantly with every single group that we're working with, you know, having meetings beforehand, having meetings after, meeting with the group coordinators, and making sure that if their needs aren't met, that we find out what it is that they need and how do we make those changes. Quill and Dart is a prime example. If we had changed one of the things that the designers had put in the plans, which was to make the skywalk on the second floor go straight through the first floor or the second floor meeting room, it was going to reduce the footprint of that meeting room, eliminating 75 pool tables, which then meant the entire pool and dart tournament was signing a contract for 5 years in Cedar Rapids. We nixed the change. We modified our plans to keep them here and renegotiate a 3-year term. So, you know, you're correct. There are things that come up, but a lot of it is working through this with a lot of organizations to figure out, you know, what can we do to keep them happy and as well to keep them here and keep them coming back. And, you know, there's a number of announcements that we have not made publicly of groups that we're working with and organizations that we're working with in terms of bringing them to Waterloo or bringing them back that have left here in the past. And there's going to be a few that, quite honestly, we can't bring back. There's going to be a few that, you know, we can't afford to bring back. There's a couple of shows that take place at the convention center that literally cost us money. To have them as guests at the convention center actually costs the hotel money, it costs the convention center money, and in the past has been costing the city money. So there is a little bit of a turmoil and hurdle of dealing with some of that.
All right, thank you.
Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you so much.
With the second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned.
Thank you for coming, yeah. A meeting of the Finance Committee, and it's a roll call, Madam Clerk.
Yep. Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Morrissey,
Here.
Mrs. Jewin.
It has been suggested to me that I can appoint another member to the Finance Committee. Is that acceptable, Madam Clerk?
Who will it be?
Mr. Amos?
Mr. Amos, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Amos is here for Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Jacobs here? Well, get him in here. You might have just been de-appointed. Hold on. You won't be offended? Thank you. Well, there he is.
Applause.
Yes, applause, yeah. If we could continue roll call.
Mr. Jacobs, Mr. Morrissey,
Here.
Ms. Jewin.
Here. Is
Motion to
there,
approve the agenda and the minutes of May 21st, 2018 as proposed.
Second.
discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I would entertain a motion on the travel requests.
Madam Chairperson, I move approval for the following travel requests: Scott Strader, Jennifer Sparks, and Brian Baker to attend Engineered Lumber Design and Construction class in Johnston, Iowa, June 5th, amount not to exceed $807.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Morrissey, I think Mr. Jacobs took the short course. Are you willing to take
Yes.
the longer one?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion to approve the following pre-authorizations expending over $1,000. First, leisure services, amount and estimated shipping handling of $7,951.78 for one John Deere TX Turf Gator. Next is leisure services, amount and estimated shipping handling not to exceed $6,000 for approximately 150 tons of USGA number 2 premium top dressing sand for the golf courses. Next is from Leisure Services with the amount and estimated shipping and handling $2,953.50 plus $421.37 for deck chairs for Burns and Gates pools. Next is sanitation with the amount and estimated shipping and handling of $7,326.52 plus $361.91 for belts, roller, fittings, bolts, plates, and other miscellaneous parts to repair the yard waste screener. Next is the sanitation department with the amount and estimated shipping and handling $3,772.28 for the Quincy air compressor and its accessories. Next is the sewer department with the amount and estimated shipping and handling $3,000 for the dewatering centrifuge pilot test by Centris. Next is sewer department, mountain estimated shipping and handling, $3,139.35 plus $300 shipping and handling for the VFD and parts for number 1 TAS pump And finally is the traffic operations with the amount and estimated shipping handling, $1,545.83 for the Miller Bend street light pole with 8-foot arm and anchor bolts.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Mr. Jacobs, would you take the budget line items, please?
Budget line items to be amended today is to approve the budget amendment to add the use of bond proceeds for bonds sold in prior years anticipated to be spent in the current year in the amount of $8 million as submitted by the Finance Department. Secondly, to approve the budget amendment, adjust the budgeted amount of sewer principal and interest payments to the expected amount by $119,501 as submitted by the Finance Department.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay, we have now the amount of the bills in the amount of $17,487,137.12, as detailed in the accounts payable report dated May 29th, 2018. Receive this report, place on file, and forward to the full council.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same? Great.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? We are adjourned. Thank you. That was record.
Evening's council meeting. Madam Clerk, could you please read the roll?
Mr. Jacobs?
Here.
Mr. Morrissey?
Here.
Mr. Schimpf?
Here.
Mrs. Klein?
Here.
Mr. Amos?
Here.
Mr. Schmidt?
Here.
Mrs. Jewin?
Here.
All right, thank you. I'd ask that you would all join me for a moment of silence. Take your hats off if you have them on. All right, thank you. This pledge will be led by Rudy Jones, Community Development Director.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented, as well as the minutes of the May 21st, 2018 regular session and minutes of the May 22nd, 2018 special session
Second.
as presented.
Second.
That motion has been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. And just a reminder, just to continue to talk into the microphones, we received some correspondence from someone watching, so please continue to speak into the mics. Now it's oral presentation time, and first up on the list, we have Mr. Dwayne Eilers.
My address is 1205 and a half Bishop Street, Waterloo. This concerns what happened last week and what happened in October. The police raided a home I own and a garage and a couple of sheds. I never was even notified. I wasn't even notified after it was done. 11 days later, the neighbor told me, your house has been raided, it's wide open. So I went up there and I locked it up and closed it up. I went to Officer Woodrow, Officer Riker, Officer Getke, all from the task force, and say, what the Sam hell is going on? Nobody's notified me, nobody's contacted me, nobody's let me know anything. They passed me from one to the other, and I never got an answer. So I just let everything go. Now last weekend, not just the past days, but a week ago, these same ex-renters that disappeared in October never came back. Decided to cut in my house, cut the locks off the shed, cut the locks off the gate to get into the property. I call for an officer to come out. Officer named Chopper, if I have it pronounced right, showed up at the property. We showed him everything. He says, well, I'll go talk to those people. A week before that, they showed up at my place of business. 3 police officers told him, go see a lawyer if you got a problem. And I told him, go see a lawyer, and if you want to pay the storage bill for whatever was left there, you're entitled to it. But they cut into the property. Officer Chopper says, I'll go talk to him. I showed him the lease when it ran out. I showed him when the utilities went off. I showed him pictures of the property they took. He calls me up and says, what, they're entitled to their stuff to get it any way they want. I said, you're authorizing these people to break into my property, cut my chain fence, cut my locks, cut off the house, cut off the garage. He said, well, you better learn to be a landlord. They have rights. I said, I want to talk to the captain, and he slammed the phone down on me. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm just a citizen, but Officer Chopper ought to be fired. When do you authorize people to break into my property and say it's legal? I told them on the previous 2 weeks, if they had a problem, go see a lawyer or pay me the storage bill.
What I will say, saying Officer Chopper or any other city employee needs to be fired, you're pushing the lines. Now, we're listening and the chief is taking notes. So please continue your comments, keep them germane, and the chief will follow up on your request.
I am calm.
I didn't say you weren't. I said keep your comments germane.
To a what?
Germane. Keep them.
I am. I'm talking about the break-in of the police department that went in October, and they tore my place apart looking for dope. And this same renter, Williams, told me, this is his words, we have friends in the police department and they take care of us. So all of a sudden, I let everything go until a weekend ago when they broke in again. And then to have this officer come in and protect him, if you want to call it. What's going on? Where's the dope? They never did say they ever found any dope on the property or anything else. Nobody. Officer Woodrow, Rickers, Geick, none of them ever said they found nothing. I asked them, what's going on? They didn't even notify me, as I said previously. So I think this is just another case of harassment because I'm Dwayne Eilers. I'm a pain in everybody's butt. I'm not going to sit still and take it. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Next, we have Mike Goings with regards to speaking at council meetings, I believe.
1203 West 2nd Street. Mr. Mayor, I first spoke before the city council in the early 80s. I've been here several times over the past year. I've always been respectful and always thought out what I was going to say so I didn't waste council's time. And during the discussion on the fireworks ban, I was able to give council an insight on what it was like to be affected by fireworks. And unfortunately, on Tuesday nights, I have a class I have to attend, so I won't be able to stick around tonight for the fireworks zoning ordinance discussion. Originally, last week, I wasn't going to speak because I didn't think I had anything new to add to the conversation. After thinking about it a couple days, I did come up with something new that maybe the council wouldn't have thought about. Last week, I called the city clerk's office to register to speak, and then I came down and was prepared to speak. And in all my years of coming to the city council meetings, I never have felt as disrespected as I did last week when I wasn't allowed to speak, even after I followed the rules and the guidelines. If the response is, well, it's an option if the public gets to speak, why was I allowed to register? Why wasn't I told while I was sitting here, the whole city council meeting, that I wasn't going to be allowed to speak? And one of the saddest parts is, when I asked the city clerk if she had passed on that I had registered to talk, she said yes, and she apologized to me. She's not the one that should have apologized to me. Her and her office did what they were supposed to do. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Goins. I don't remember if I cut you off. It wasn't intentional, so
No, I
mean,
wasn't allowed to speak at all.
Was that? Did I miss his? Did he sign up for the fireworks, and then when it came up, he wasn't able to talk?
Called the question.
Oh, it was after. Okay, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yeah, it was at that point. It was closed. So I'm apologize for that in advance. So you've always been very respectful, decent conversation, always added input. So you got caught up in procedural things, and at that point, we had to call the question. So apologies for that situation, sir.
Thank you.
All right. We have, is there anyone else that would like to address the council? Yes, sir.
Jim Chapman, 224 Birch. I'd like to have an update on Sunnyside South and the Rath Building, please. Where do we stand on this?
Sunnyside is in litigation, and what about the Rath Building? I mean,
I can go first on Sunnyside South. Dave Zellifer, City Attorney. We had a hearing on March 29th on a contempt action that the other folks brought against the city. The judge has not ruled on that yet.
Okay, I thought he was gonna rule within 30 days. I was at that meeting, Mr. Zelfer. He hasn't ruled yet?
No, sir.
You were at the meeting?
How about the Rath Building?
Come on, no.
Noel Anderson, Community Planning Development Director. The Rath Administration Building, as you may recall, we did take possession of that back. So we are looking to put together a request for proposals. We actually have about 3 or 4 groups that are interested in redeveloping that potentially into housing. So we're putting together some specs that we want to have them address in a request for proposal. We'll hopefully be getting that out in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Has that got asbestos in it? No?
No, it does not. We removed the asbestos as part of the original transference.
Right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council? And I'm just telling you in advance, I may have to look down at my phone. There's another situation taking place that I got to be aware of. So if you're talking and I look at my phone, it's not because I'm not listening. So apology in advance.
Anything else? Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Is anybody from the public?
I asked, no one else came up.
Oh, okay. Well, Mr. Mayor, first of all, I wanted to say that last Friday it was Bike to Friday Lou, and it was really cool. The whole event was cool. The music was great. The weather was great. And the downtown businesses, 44 of them in downtown Waterloo had contributed for the prize giveaway that was a celebration of biking as well as our downtown Main Street. And the downtown businesses contributed almost $2,500 in prizes that all you had to do was ride your bicycle and park it in the bike valet. And we had a little over 40 people do that. But in doing this and walking around downtown, one of the things I found out was that we have 15 new businesses that have started in Main Street, Waterloo, 15 new businesses, and we don't hear enough about that. I mean, we talk about big businesses and all that kind of stuff, but these are small businesses coming to town, and they're coming to Waterloo. Why? They're not coming to Waterloo because they don't think that they're going to succeed. They come because they believe in Waterloo and that Waterloo has something to offer the business that they're going to be providing a service for or a product for. So it was great. The second thing that I wanted to bring up was just what happened last week, and I brought my Robert's Rules of Order this week, specifically because I want to just quote a couple things here. And this is from Robert's Rules of Order, and it says in there, if a motion at hand is controversial and a controversial question, you have, and this is talking about the presiding officer, an obligation to see that debate is not stopped before the minority has been able to present its side. Also, it says that the chairman or presiding officer does not have the authority to close debate as long as one person wants to discuss the motion and has not spoken twice already. Both of those things didn't happen last week. And it goes on to say, because it takes a member's rights away in discussing the matter or debating the matter, that's why that vote requires a 2/3 vote. So I will be keeping my Robert's Rules of Order book very handy tonight and future nights, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry you feel like you didn't get an opportunity to speak last week.
To finish.
To speak. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, just a word of caution for all drivers on the streets. Schools are closing for the summer and getting out early for heat. And if they're anything like my grandkids, we already found my 9-year-old granddaughter on the roof of the garage. So keep an eye on them on the street. Just watch out.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, one final thing I forgot to mention, if I could, and that is yesterday at my house, we had one of our relatives visiting, and she had some type of a medical episode, and we called 911 right away. And Chief Treelor, I would like to commend the fire department on their quick response. They were there within 2 minutes. And it's much appreciated. I hope she's doing okay now. We'll find out here in a couple of days, but thank you, Chief Treelor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Schaub.
Mr. Mayor, I wanted to comment on how great Marks Park looks down next to the amphitheater. I took my kids there on Sunday, I believe it was, and they had a fantastic time. Really great little facility that we have over there. The second thing is that's been brought to my attention is Liberty Park, which is in Ward 5. There is a lot of graffiti down on the tunnel, and I'm not sure if that would be Mr. Homewrecker to speak with about that, or if that would be Leisure Services. But I'd like to see about what we can do to get some of that cleaned up. It's a lot of kids go down there and they play soccer and other things happen down there. So I'd like to get some of that cleaned up. If I could have the discussion with one of those staff members.
We'll get it taken care of now that we know. Anyone else?
Okay. I'll make a motion to close the oral presentations, receive comments, and place on file.
Second.
A motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Oral presentations closed.
Okay. Move to receive the consent agenda, place it on file, and add the dollar amount to 1A1 in the amount of $17,487,137.12.
Second.
Mr.
Big
Mayor?
number.
You want me to go through that again?
No, you're fine. You got it. Yes, ma'am.
Can we pull off 1A number 9 for discussion?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I would, as I stated last week, for the past almost 9 years, I have been an employee of the Isle Casino Hotel Waterloo, and I see again that there's something with their liquor license on here, so I will be abstaining from any debate or discussion on that matter. I would also like to see if we could take separately item number 3, which is the motion to appoint an individual to the property evidence technician in the police department.
All right.
Number 3.
Council okay with moving those separately? So,
Mr. Mayor, could we maybe have our chief financial officer just speak real briefly about the $17 million? I mean, that's a little out of the ordinary nut, and I'm just thinking the folks at home hearing that might want to have a little bit of an overview. That's a particularly high. No, just have Michelle explain a little bit about why that's such a large number, so people don't think we spend $17 million every week.
We have to remove it, don't we?
Yes, it does, has to be pulled off.
Yes.
What item number was that?
One, bills payable.
so that's 3 items.
Which one is
So it's number, that better be 1A1.
That's your budget
1A?
number,
Oh,
yes, yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
it's right there.
So everything but 1A1, 1A9, and 1B3 we're voting on. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
I will abstain from item 1B2A, and I will vote yes on everything else.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We'll take those in order. Michelle?
Want me to take the first one?
Yeah. Can I have just a couple seconds to
Okay.
get my minutes in order? Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So item 1A1 is resolution to approve the bills payment from the Finance Committee invoice summary report, a copy of which is on file at the city clerk's office. But the reason I was asking Ms. Weidner to just speak to it a little bit is it's
Can we
17.
get a second?
Second.
All right, Ms. Weidner? Yes, sir.
About 17,487,000, and there are weeks where we're less than $1 million. So I just thought the folks at home might be curious about that.
Michelle Weidner, Chief Financial Officer. Yes, this actually might be a record payment altogether, but it's certainly by far the highest of the year. Most of our bonds, in fact, all of them except one, require annual principal payments. So we're paying about $12.2 million in principal on bonds tonight, and also semi-annual interest. So our total debt payment tonight is $13.7 million out of the 17.5, and that brings the rest of our bills down to a much more typical amount for a week.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Klein,
I have a couple of questions.
I need you to bring it to the
Oh, I'm
floor, so
sorry.
adopt it.
I would like to move that we discuss 1A9.
No, you need to adopt a resolution approving.
Oh, you want me to read the whole thing? I'm on the wrong page. Okay. I move to adopt a resolution approving preliminary specifications, bid document, et cetera, and setting date of bid opening as June 21st, 2018, and public hearing as June 25th, 2018, in conjunction with the purchase of two 2019 single-axle snow control plow 37,000 GVW dump trucks, and instruct city clerk to publish said notice.
Second.
All right, thank you. Questions?
Yes, the bid specs. How do we develop the bid specs for these vehicles?
Sandy Greco, Interim Public Works Director. We take the past specs that we've used in the past, and we sit down with the mechanics and the operators and go through all the specs and make adjustments or additions, or we delete certain things.
And who do we predict? Who do we predict will bid on this?
We send it out to the suppliers that have bid before. We also go online and find other areas. So usually we send out by mail. Probably we try to do 5 or 6 and stay as local as we can.
And my last question is, why does it have to be a 2019? Why can't it just say new? For a leftover 18 or even 17?
Well, usually we can't get 18s anymore because they build them as they're spec'd. So they quit building 2018s already. So that's why we're going into the next year.
Thank you.
Ms. Greco, why don't we could do the state bids too, don't we? Or is that just on certain products?
No, we also send them to the vendors who are on the state bid.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other questions on this item? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Item number 1B3 is a motion to appoint Ryan Dolan to the position of Property Evidence Technician in the Police Department effective June 4th, 2018.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Questions?
Mr. Mayor, if we could just get some overview on, as I normally like to do, get some overview on the position. And I did have a citizen contact me regarding if they thought maybe we had some officers on light duty that could do this sort of work, and I don't know if there's any validity to that or not.
Dan Trelka, Chief of Police. We do utilize them when we can. However, there's heavy lifting involved. Typically, when officers are on light duty, they have lifting restrictions. This position was created with a retirement. The resignation or the retirement letter was submitted in October. The position was approved to be filled December 5th. The Human Resources Committee approved filling this position December 11th, and the Civil Service list was approved March 2nd. The process for filling these positions is quite lengthy and cumbersome, and in that time, the employee who's been working in there has been working overtime. She's been denied vacation. We've been trying to help her out where we can with other personnel, but we have a backlog of evidence right now in our evidence division. It's a two-person unit, and when she's sick, we just close property evidence. So we've got evidence that lingers, I won't say unsecure, it gets locked up, but it creates a gap in our chain of command. And the amount of evidence we take in is quite tremendous. That building across the street, half of that building is filled with evidence.
And Chief, would you say that this, would you say that this position is vital to making sure that some of the cases that, some of the crimes and things that we solve, that this position is vital to making that happen as well?
It is. And the taking custody of evidence has evolved greatly over the past decades with DNA evidence and such. There's much more involved in storing it and maintaining it in the appropriate fashion.
Good, thank you.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
All right, thank you. What do we have? Number 2, please. Somebody. Anybody? Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Are you going to?
I want, it needs to be, I need to hear it first.
Mr. Mayor, I'll take item 2.
Yes, sir.
Number 2 is a motion to receive and file proof of publication of notice of public hearing, and then is for a lease agreement with Verve Kombucha LLC for property located at 327 West 3rd Street, also known as the Public Market Building, for a term ending June 30th, 2025.
Second.
All right, the motion's been made with the
Mr.
second.
Mayor, I'm going to excuse
Yes,
myself,
sir.
conflict of interest.
So just so you know what's going on, Councilman Morrissey and Councilman Schmidt recused himself, so there won't be any conflicts of interest with this conversation, and hopefully eventually a vote as well. So they did what they were supposed to do in that situation. Mr. Holmbrecker, could you please close the door?
And Mr. Mayor, with them recusing themselves, how many votes do we need to pass this motion?
Ms. Clerk.
You still need 4 votes to approve the resolution.
Still need 4.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Right, so the public hearing is now open. We do have a speaker that wanted to come up first and speak, but I'm going to remind everyone that we want our comments to remain germane, professional, refrain from personal and pertinent or slanderous remarks. So we're going to set the tempo right at the beginning. This is a public's hearing. So
I just wanted to make clear, there was a call to career question in regards to my employment for Bermuda Corporation nearly 10 years ago. I'm no longer employed by Bermuda, and that does not prevent me from voting on this matter.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. First, we have Andy Fuchman. You had signed up to speak, so you had to speak during this time since it's on this particular agenda item. Yes, sir. So please state your name and address for the record.
Andy Footman from 422 North Ellen Street. When I came here before, when we did the presentations, I said, I think we're in the right team, in the right place at the right time. And that's how we feel still today. I just wanted to thank all the people that have, if it's not clear, I'm part of this kombucha process. I just wanted to thank everybody who's been part of this process since we started thinking about kombucha several years ago. Thanks to the members of the WDC who offered their support to us. It's kind of intimidating, but it's a real honor to have them get behind us. Thanks to all the other folks who have helped us understand our idea better and refine it as we get closer to the time we're about to be in. Thanks to the other folks who submitted their ideas. You know, I think a little competition makes things better. And so it was good for us to be in a process that was competitive because I feel like it helped us understand our idea better. So thanks to those folks. It's been an honor to be part of this with you. When we get to June 30, 2025, obviously our goal is that all of us will be happy that we were part of this. So, and I really believe that when we come back together on June 30, 2025 to talk about this next step, we'll all be happy that we worked on this together. So thank you very much. It's been an honor.
Hopefully we'll all be here. That's a few years from now. All right. Is there anyone else that would like to speak towards this item on the agenda? This is our public hearing portion. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council.
Good evening.
Darren Beck, Bermuda Companies. I just want to say, first of all, that all any of us want is success for whatever happens next for the public market. The city was wise, the WDC was prudent in the investment that they made in that area at the time, and it's been a spectacular addition to the downtown Waterloo area. The plaza is a very important component to what happens downtown, and tied to the River Loop project, I think you should all be very proud of that accomplishment. I just want to say tonight that no matter who you end up awarding the lease to, we wish them success, whether it's Andy and his crew or whether it's us and ours. I just stand here before you this evening wanting you to know that I'm not going to beleaguer the proposals or the merits of each. I just want to say that we offered more rent. We offered, in my opinion, the better proposal. And whether you agree with that or not will reflect in your votes, I'm sure. But I need you to know and understand how important this decision is for Lark Brewing and its future in Waterloo, Iowa. It's a do or die situation for Lark Brewing. We need a new facility and we need it immediately. And there's literally no other facility that can meet our timeline better than the public market building. And we would like very, very much to be the tenant in the public market building. But we will, of course, respect the wishes of the city council. And if we don't win, I guess we'll come have some kombucha in a couple of years. Thank you.
2025, maybe. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Hi, Caleb Gable, 1415 Eric Road, Cedar Falls. I'd like to speak on behalf of Lark Brewing and say that beer is a diverse product. Lark Brewing over the last couple of years, as an employee of theirs, I've been able to gather that people demand diversity and a variety in the product, and they've been able to satisfy that need for the last couple of years. I think having such a diverse product enables a diverse fan base and a diverse demographic, and I think that would be a great addition to the downtown area in Waterloo. They'd be greatly suited for the public market, and I hope that diversification is exactly the thing that can happen in that respect. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Carrie Dara, Greater Cedar Valley Alliance and Chamber. And I just really want to commend the city for the process. The facility has been empty for a while. It's taken some time. You've been very patient. Especially want to shout out to Adrian Miller and Noel Anderson, because many times you have people come to the microphone with complaints, justified sometimes, many times, but you don't always have people come and share the praise for what you've done. So we do appreciate the process that you've taken your time with. And most importantly, our hope is that the city continues to work with the remaining projects, the ones that may not get the lease, and help them fulfill their dream of being in downtown Waterloo. And if we can help in any way, we're there for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Going once, going.
Nate Nims, 930 Sunrise Boulevard here in Waterloo. I am also the pastor of First United Methodist Church downtown, but I'm not speaking as a pastor tonight because the Methodist Church is part of the reason why Prohibition happened in the US, and we have since changed our minds about that. We're now more like Ben Franklin and saying beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. And I would love downtown Waterloo to be more happy with a diverse beer market. I know when I travel to other areas, I was just in Washington, D.C. this last week for work. When I looked at places to go, I looked if I could visit a brewery in one place and a brewery a couple blocks away, just to see how the taste of the city is developing and what one place does well, another place might lack. And so to be able to balance that back and forth and see how folks are investing and innovating. I've appreciated much of what Lark has done. They've helped me a lot by offering our church space to do events there. We have one coming up this Thursday where we'll have a Bible study and then make peanut butter sandwiches for the hospitality house. And knowing their involvement in the community has been great for me. I also, this morning I got a coffee from Sidecar. I rode my bike here tonight that I bought from Greg and Jess. They're all great projects. They're all great people. But when I look at that space, I see the dreams that Lark has, and I support them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone that would, come on.
Good evening, Jim Miller, 117 Forest Avenue. Here on behalf as the loan executive for Waterloo Development Corp. And speaking on behalf of the board. First off, we want to thank all three proposals. I think it shows the progress that we've made downtown. And if we went through this process, 5 years ago, we may not have received these. So I think it's a sign the city is doing the right things. WDC is doing the right things. And some of that progress is a directly result of the owners of Verb, Brent Dahlstrom, Dave Morgan, and the gentleman from Sidecar. And, the proposal just demonstrates their further commitment to the downtown area. And that's why WDC is putting our support behind the Verve proposal.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, Dan Gable Museum, 303 Jefferson Street. What great progress we've seen being at the facility we are, to have a sports complex and actually have to stop for people walking across the street. What a rewarding thing to see the progress we've had in downtown Waterloo, and that's a real commitment to you guys. I commend Waterloo for being part of that process. I get to ride my bike to work every day from Cedar Falls to Waterloo because of the great trail system we have. I love this community. I love what it represents. I think all of these are great proposals, but I know the guys at Verve, and they are outstanding people. Alex Hoddle, had a chance to coach him in cross country. When you talk about keeping talent and Waterloo talent in-house, that's a representation of what we get to do. It doesn't hurt me with being a wrestling museum that Dave Morgan happened to be a state wrestling champion. I'm okay saying that, but he's as good of a person as I've been around. Here's a guy that came to us and actually said, we're going to donate $1 per Gable beer to your organization. So as a nonprofit, I see the work that they're doing. So I commend what they're doing. I believe in Verb and what they're doing. I think they're all excellent choices, but I'm just proud of what Waterloo's done, and I'm proud of the vision that we have in downtown Waterloo. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Going a second time?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Motion to close the hearing and receive and file oral and written comments.
Second. That motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Resolution approving lease agreement with Verb Kombucha LLC for property located at 327 West 3rd Street, the Public Market Building, with monthly lease payments of $0 the first year, $1,000 the second year, $2,000 the third year, $3,000 the fourth year, $3,833 the fifth year, and $4,000 for years 6 and 7 for a term ending June 30th, 2025, and authorize the mayor and city clerk to execute said documents.
Second. That motion has been made with the second.
Mr. Mayor.
No. Do you want to give us any highlights of the agreement? Just talk through this really quickly for those out there listening, then we'll come back right to you, Mr. Shemp.
Noel Anderson, Community Planning Development Director. As noted, it notes the lease amounts per month. As you may recall, in the original proposal, there was a grant amount asked for by the city. We did not have cash intended to go into the project, so we worked that out with them to come out of the monthly amounts. So that was slightly altered from the original proposal to meet the city's ability to make it work. Otherwise, it's a typical lease amount in terms of a lot of the utility and services will be paid by them, taxes paid by them. The use of the premises will be for operating a kombucha, tea brewery, tasting room, bistro, and distribution of kombucha tea. I'm sure I'm butchering that every time. Sorry, Andy. The parking lot will be available for use at all times by members of the general public. The restrooms will be made available for outdoor events held at the Expo Plaza. Hours of operation will be 7 days a week. And of course, they'll be using the Expo Plaza a certain number of times per year as they work with the Wesco group to set up those times to maximize the use of the Expo area. Litter control, garbage disposal, snow removal, and all that, again, a typical lease otherwise.
All right, thank you. Mr. Shemp.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. This was not an easy decision. I looked at this for a long time. I put a survey out online for folks to take. I think people contacted me more about this than they did the budget. It was a very, very tough decision. I knew getting into politics, there was going to be some tough decisions, and this was probably one of the toughest that I think I've faced so far in 5 months of since being sworn in. All three of these are great projects. I want to provide my full commitment to, however the council votes, the other two, of trying to find them a place in downtown Waterloo. I think that we could definitely work to see what else we could do for some of these other two projects, depending upon which one the council picks tonight. And I know that your office is committed to that too. I think they're all great. They're all, extraordinary, would be great additions to Waterloo, and downtown is on the move. I don't care what anybody says it is. Just as one of my colleagues stated in oral comments. So this was a tough decision. I didn't take it lightly. I did do a lot of research on it, and I'm just going to leave it at that and let it come to a vote and see how the council lets it play out.
All right. Council, any questions? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt? Oh, he is abstaining, sorry. Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey's abstaining. Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I had talked to Mr. Beck. You have our full commitment to trying to figure something out. I don't know if it can, but you'll have our commitment. And Mrs. Young, somewhere,
In the back.
you have our commitment to trying to put you in a better situation as well. And those conversations will begin immediately. All right.
We need to.
Let's leave them out. No. They won't be able to see it up there. That happened before, didn't it?
Yeah. Last time Mr. Morrison.
He wanted to keep both of you out there.
Probably a good idea.
It's not on camera. Where are they going? They need to stay KWWL. All right, number 3.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Item number 3 is a motion, we'll motion to receive and file proof of publication of notice of public hearing, and that's for the fiscal year 2018 budget amendment.
Second.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Going a second time.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to close the hearing and receive, close the hearing.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Mr. Mayor, could we have a little overview on this?
Let's put it on the, let's go through the resolution approving.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to adopt a resolution approving fiscal year 2018 budget amendment.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Ms. Wiedner, can you go through a little bit of what's happening?
Yes, Michelle Wiedner, Chief Financial Officer. This is a process we typically go through annually. Many things happen after we set the budget. We're now operating 18 months after the budget that was set in March of 2017. So a lot of particularly capital projects may proceed faster or slower than we thought they were going to 18 months ago. The same thing happens with grants. We may get grants we didn't know about when we certified the original budget. So most of the budget figures that roll up into this are those kind of things. There is a large increase in the amount of bonds we anticipate being spent this year. If you remember, we had a extra large bond issue a year ago to provide an economic or IRD, an Iowa Reinvestment District bond issue, and those funds mostly went to the Green Tech 2 Hotel, the Courtyard by Marriott Hotel, and that is mostly built now. So that's one of the reasons that we're increasing the budget. And I think those are the largest items we have. If you had any others you particularly want me to discuss, we can do that too.
I think you just wanted, so folks know exactly what's going on. We do it every year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Number 4, please.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Schimpf.
Number 4 is a motion to receive and file proof of publication of notice of public hearing approving revenue purpose statement, and that is an amendment to the Mid-American Energy Company Electric System franchise agreement.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this particular item on the agenda?
Forrest Dillevue, 1725 Huntington Road. This franchise fee, I consider it a tax. It helps the city at a time when it needs help. But what it doesn't talk about, like the Courier mentioned this last week, it provides a burden on the county. The county is struggling to keep Country View open. This is just another 1% on their operating budget on those fees. On the churches, it's another 1% on their operating fees for those things. And for people renting who are having a hard time meeting their bills, who are down there trying to see if they qualify for fuel assistance. You're adding another % to them. Yes, it's helping the city, but you're taking from others who have, I feel, greater needs than the city. This city needs to reorganize. It needs to reevaluate how you spend money. Maybe we don't always need brand new. Maybe we don't need the top of the line. You know, those of us out there living day to day, we don't get brand new. We don't always, you know, and like the rentals that I have, I don't charge the most rent. And those people, they're struggling. Various months, they're struggling a lot. So you're just going to make it a little tougher for them, but a little easier for the city. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else going a second time?
Oh, Mr. Mayor. Motion to close the hearing and receive and file oral and written comments.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the hearing is closed. Yes, sir.
Motion to receive, file, consider, and pass for the first time an ordinance amending ordinance number 5028 by increasing the franchise fee to 4%.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Council question?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
You know, when we did the 2016 budget, you would remember because you were there. I think Mr. Morrissey might have been there. But I gave a PowerPoint presentation. I believe I read that was the first time that ever been done by a Waterloo City Council member. But anyhow, in that PowerPoint presentation, it identified, among other things, this utility fee tax. And, you know, the first year we did this for part of the year, and the first year it raised, I believe, roughly $1 million. And then beginning in 2014, I believe, started raising $3 million a year. So that's an additional $12, $15 million that we have taken from the taxpayers over the last 10 or 15 years. And the problem I have with this, in addition to what has been said up at the podium, is I don't know that anybody can identify exactly what the taxpayers have gotten for that. At the time this thing was passed, I thought if we would take a look at this and then do an offset for the taxpayers, then it might be something worthwhile, because there is something to be said for people from outside of Waterloo do participate in this tax when they come to Waterloo and spend money here, and when they stay at the hotels, and when they're in the hospital and various things like that. But the downside to it is, as one of the speakers mentioned, you know, this is really, I think, a very regressive tax, because it hits the poor as well as the wealthy. And it's also a double tax for those of us that support churches, nonprofit organizations, schools, because all of those entities, most of which maybe don't pay sales tax or property tax, they don't pay property tax, but they do end up paying this tax. And I think that what the city of Waterloo has done is use this as kind of a vehicle or a crutch to not deal with the systemic problems that I think we have from a budgetary standpoint. And I think it's just as simple as, do we believe we have a spending problem, or do we believe we have a revenue problem? And I think you look at other communities that are already starting to address the commercial backfill by making tough decisions, and you see what's going on at the state, you see what's going on at the county levels. You know, one of our legislators said the reason they're looking to do away with the commercial property backfill is because the city level of government has been the least responsive to reacting to the change in budgets overall. And so they're kind of using that as I guess, a stick rather than a carrot to force city level government to become more realistic, more austere, whatever the word might be. But I think this is a bad idea. It also seems to me, I think I heard you say that when you were asked if and when, I guess I shouldn't say if, but when the state does stop filling the backfill, you know, how we were going to make that up. And I thought I heard you say, well, we've still got 2% or 2 cents on the utility fee. So if we do that this year, now we're down to 1. And, you know, 1% is roughly $900,000. I believe the number from the state on the commercial property tax is 1.8 million. And I think, you know, we're just continuing to kick this can down the road and robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I just don't think this is a responsible governing. So I'm not going to support this.
I assume by you're talking about Mayor Hart.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought I looked at you, so I apologize if yes.
I intend to support this and the next amendment as well, but I do so terribly worried about the future. It's like a bunch of kids got into a Band-Aid box and stuck a Band-Aid everywhere, and that's what our budget looks like. It's not a healthy budget. It's what we had to do, but I will never do this again. I won't vote for this again, because I do in one sense agree with my colleague that we've got to get at the root cause, which is, and I know that, Mr. Mayor, you are working on restructuring city government. Excellent. I hope and pray that that comes before the year's end, because I think that's going to save us. I personally would like to see an administrator over all the department heads who answers to the mayor and the council. The healthier communities have that city administrator. It's not a different form of government. It's just a position called city administrator. We cannot rely on the backfill. It's just dying in front of our very eyes. And so we have to reorganize our city government. And so I will support this time, because I pledged during the budget talks, and I'm a person of my word. But I'm giving my word now. I won't ever vote for this sort of tax again.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Klein. Yes, sir.
Will echo my colleague from the First Ward's comments. I will not support this again. I know that we had to do it to kind of get where we needed to be with the budget, but there is some opportunities coming up here with the 20% on that hotel motel tax that I think needs to be used for general fund relief. And I would hope that everybody up here would get behind that. I think that I'm not interested in touching the 70% that goes to Convention and Visitors Bureau, but the 20%, I think that needs to, that is paid for by folks that are coming from out of town into Waterloo. I will be supporting this tonight and the next one, because I did vote for the budget, and like my colleague, I stick by my word. So with that said, I don't have anything else on that. But
all right, thank you, yes, sir. Mr. Jacobs.
Mr. Mayor, just want to back up a little bit to explain how we got to where we are tonight. So, absolutely, I agree with most everything that was said. It is a tax, somewhat of a regressive tax. I think, though, at budget time, it was a compromise across the board. If you recall, one reason we got into the situation is just prior to budget time, we had a reduction in assessments or assessed value of properties. So that put us in a hole that we were not expecting. So honestly, we were thrown a curveball. It doesn't excuse everything that goes on here, but we had to deal with an unexpected situation. So we talked about the levy rate, the franchise fee. What can we do? What should we do? What could be this resolution for that budget only? We did say that we would look to find better ways, more efficient ways to run our city, so the next budget we would not have this, we could cut back this franchise step that we made. We're not saying that we would eliminate all the way, but we could reverse course. And we did say that, and we fully intended to do that. The word efficiency is not a bad word. It just means we're smarter in how we carry out the business of the city to provide the services for the residents. So that's how we got where we got. And so there was a lot of forces at play here, but I think we're all on the same accord that we want to reverse course in the next budget and find ways to reverse this step.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Well, I guess I have to disagree with almost all my colleagues here because I think they're missing the point. The point has been over the last several decades, we've had a federal government and we've had state governments that have continually given corporate welfare and lost sight of people welfare and what the people of the United States, what the people of Iowa, what the people of the city of Waterloo want. I think it's time to end corporate welfare. I think it's time to pay attention to the people. I voted against this budget because I believe that there was other budget proposals that were better than this one. But this is one means of raising revenue that the city has that hasn't been taken away by our state government. If we all remember right, a year ago at this time, we had lost local control because we have legislators in the State House who had taken away some of our abilities to do things here in the city of Waterloo. I consider that wrong. Elections have consequences. I say that all the time. Everybody else in this room says that. And what people are saying here is they're all worried about the backfill. Well, remember, that was a corporate welfare move by the governor at that time. And the way you correct that is you have that legislature that made that agreement at that time, that it was a standing rule that that backfill was to be in perpetuity. And that got lost when a total group took over the State House and eliminated it. People that want that backfill and see that as important to the cities across Iowa need to be elected this coming November so that they honor that agreement that was made in 2013 or 2012 to honor that backfill forever. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that that is a major thing that comes up, major issue that comes up for all of our municipalities. Costs of living go up all the time. The city has to buy their goods from all different private entities. Those private entities want an increase in profit. Costs go up, the cost of the city goes up. But for some reason, we have this mentality that the cost of providing city services always has to go down, especially given the fact that the legislature has handed us more than curveballs. It's handed us a dodgeball that's weighted down with lead, where we can't take the actions that we need to take in order to continue to provide the services that the citizens of Waterloo not want, they deserve from us. The final thing is I've heard the word never being used in relation to future votes. Well, I hope that never saying never sometimes doesn't ring too well when it comes down to having to make those very, very emergency decisions that our city has to make. And we will have to make them if we don't get the right people in there that really support our city governments and the people in our individual cities. Right. And so I will support this, and I'll support the next one.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
My colleague, Mr. Morrissey, Councilman Morrissey, is correct. Elections do have consequences. And I think the last several elections have shown that people have a disconnect between their lives in their houses, on their streets, and what goes on downtown. I really believe they do. And until we can show them that we are super responsible and brave and courageous when it comes to decisions and not just political, then I think that disconnect will go on. If we can show them that we really are on their side, then they will support us.
All right. Anyone else real quickly? So one, and I'm not talking to any council person directly or anybody else, but I will take to task any legislature that says that this council didn't go line item by line item, spending hours of their own personal time trying to make decisions and come up with a recipe that's good for the taxpayers. There were some increases in revenues and there were some stops in particular areas, but I will take to task any legislator that didn't say any of us didn't go through that budget and look line item by line item. Mr. Jacobs is correct. There has to be a compromise in ideas and philosophies to get us to that point. But we spent hours taking a look, and I mean, everywhere we could possibly look. And yes, we're going to move in a different direction and try to do some things a little bit differently. But it's a tough job. And, you know, just as the legislature points the finger down here, we can also point the finger back there about their revenue estimates over what they were going to have, what they're going to do. But the fact of the matter is, we are the city of Waterloo, and I know for a fact the majority of you spent hours of your own time meeting at night to try to come up with the philosophy and a recipe to put together for the citizens. Revenue increases, call it tax, call it what you will. You also offer the lowest residential decrease on property taxes in how many years? 20 years or so. So you did your due diligence, and don't let anybody take that away from you, whether or not they agree with what we vote on. Madam Clerk.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
All right.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Michelle, are there some timing issues?
Michelle Wiedner, Chief Financial Officer. Yes, we would appreciate it if this would be all passed tonight. And American Energy has some steps they need to take to get it implemented, and so to get it timely into our budget, we'd like to proceed.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
motion to consider and pass for the second and third times and adopt said ordinance.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Number 5, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Morrissey.
I'd like to make a motion to receive, file, approve publication, notice of public hearing, and approve the revenue purpose statement for amendment to Mid-America Energy Company Natural Gas System Franchise Agreement.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The hearing is now open. Is there anyone that'd like to speak to this item?
Don Scherer, 1415 Downing Avenue. I came to town about 6 years ago and I bought the Dairy Queen on University Avenue. Didn't know any of you. I didn't come to the city to ask for any money. Bought it on my own. Have turned it around and done well. If you want to call the tax reduction of the commercial tax that Governor Branstad did, corporate welfare, I did benefit from that. It did help me rebuild a failing building, purchase equipment, hire extra people to turn that around. And I just think that lumping this in as corporate welfare on one hand, but yet every week you come here and you're giving money to somebody to start a business in Waterloo. If that's not corporate welfare, what is? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council? Going a second time. Mr. Morrison.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to close the hearing and accept file oral comments.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The hearing is now closed.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to receive, file, consider, and pass for the first time an ordinance amending ordinance number 5028 by increasing the franchise fee to 4%.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. Council, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
Motion's been made with the second. Madam Clerk.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to consider and pass for the second and third times and adopt said ordinance.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Number 6, please.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Amos.
I'd like to make a motion to receive and file proof of publication and notice of public hearing, and that is purchase of one-ton DRW 4x4 pickup truck with 84-inch cab, including a snowplow package for the sewer department.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this particular item on the agenda? Going a second time.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to close the hearing.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The hearing is now closed.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution confirming approval of specifications, form of contract, et cetera.
Second.
The motion has been made with the second. Council questions? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like
Yes.
to make a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing to proceed.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to
Yes.
make a motion to receive, file, and instruct the city clerk to read bids.
Second.
All right, the motion has been made with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Madam Clerk?
Our estimate was $50,000. Our first bidder was Community Chevrolet of Cedar Falls, Iowa. Their bid amount was $45,663.72. Second bidder was Witham Auto Sales Fleet of LaPorte City, Iowa. Their bid amount was $49,045. Third bidder was Rydell Chevrolet of Waterloo, Iowa. Their bid amount was $47,131.60. Final bidder was McGrath Auto Fleet of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Their bid amount was $45,447.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion adopting a resolution approving award of contract to Rydell Chevrolet of Waterloo, Iowa in the amount of $47,131.60 in conjunction with the purchase of one-ton DRW 4x4 pickup truck with 84-inch cab, including a snowplow package for the sewer department.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second.
Mr. Mayor.
Sandy, can you talk to us about this item, the differences in price and selection of this? I'm all for local, but there was a little bit of difference.
Sandy Greco, Interim Public Works Director. What we did was we asked for this to be delivered before June 30th so we could take it out of this year's budget in the sewer department because they had money available to pay for this. So actually, the lowest bid came from McGrath. However, that is a Dodge. Our fleet is mainly Chevys and Fords, and that's what we have the parts for. If you want to approve that instead, I can come back next week. Rydell can deliver this to us before June 30th with everything we've asked. They have met the specs. Witham has a 2017 truck, possibly, and Community Chevrolet, they said if it was approved, they could possibly get us one, but there's no guarantee that they can even get a 2018. So they did quit making 2018, so what these dealers have are ones that are either on the lot or from another dealer, so we can get them delivered to us before so we can pay for it in June.
Okay. All right, Mr. Shemp.
That was pretty much the extent of my question, was what you asked.
All right. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Number 789, please.
Mayor.
Mr. Shemp.
Number 7, I move to make a resolution approving award of bid to Spawn and Rose Lumber Company of Jessup, Iowa, in the amount of $125,860 in conjunction with the purchase and construction of a 60-foot by 80-foot pole building at the city's yard waste site, and approve contract bond and certificate of insurance, and authorize the mayor and city clerk to execute said documents. Number 8, a resolution approving award of bid to Bill Cowell Ford of Hudson, Iowa for 2 Ford Interceptor sedans in the amount of $25,571 and 4 Ford Interceptor SUVs in the amount of $29,938 each.
Second.
Yeah.
Oh, 9? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You said 9. My apologies. Number 9, a resolution authorizing the submission of a small match grant application to the Wellmark Foundation for a maximum amount of $20,000, and authorize the mayor and city clerk to execute all necessary documents.
Second.
That motion's been made with the second. Council questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
So when it comes out for police vehicles, and I know the prices are a little different on each of them. The sedans are a little bit cheaper. Why do we make the decision to buy more SUVs versus sedans? Did we have more SUVs that we took out of the fleet, or we're taking out of the fleet? And just kind of some overview on that, and how we make that decision.
All right, Chief.
We try to keep it as economical as possible, but it's the biggest thing is space needs. We hold so much equipment in the vehicles right now. I don't want to call it an SUV, the larger one, the Interceptor, the crossover, I would call it, has much more room in it. And Ford has also made a decision that they're no longer going to make sedans. And a lot of our equipment we can transfer over. And the SUV crossover is more favorable to the officers. It gives them more room for their bodies and stuff. And it's basically equipment, so much equipment that we haul.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions on 7, 8, and 9? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
All right, thank you. 10, 11, 12.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Schmidt.
Item number 10 is adopting a resolution approving construction plans for sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and paving serving Village West Second Edition as submitted by Clapp Sala Garber Associates, Inc. of Marshtown, Iowa, and a sewage treatment agreement between the Department of Natural Resources and the City of Waterloo, DNR Form 29, November 00, and final acceptance of construction plans submitted to the review and acceptance by the DNR, and authorize the mayor to execute said documents. Item number 11 is adopting a resolution approving professional services agreement with Ament, Inc. of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, an amount not to exceed $65,100 in conjunction with the Traffic Adaptive Signals and Fiber Optic Communications Upgrade Project, and authorize the mayor to execute said document. And item number 12 is adopting a resolution approving a 1-year farm lease agreement with Doug Bruns for farming approximately 28.4 acres of land generally located south of Highway 20 and west of Kimball Avenue for a total yearly payment of $800, and authorize the mayor and city clerk to execute said document.
Second.
The motion's been made with a couple seconds. Any questions, council, anyone?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
I think he beat me to the buzzer.
Mr. Mayor.
You got it.
Mr. Mayor, on number 12, we're leasing 28.4 acres of land for $800 a year. Is that a misprint?
No, is that a misprint?
Look at the detachment.
Noel Anderson, Community Planning Development Director. It is not. This is basically a drainage way area, so they're just bailing it there. it's not really suitable. They actually only bale about 16 of the 28 acres, so it's not really suitable for normal crops. We bid this out about every couple of years. This is the highest bid we got.
All right.
That was my question.
All right. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
That's quick. 13, 14, and 15. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Mr.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution approving the contract for grant award between the Waterloo Housing Trust Fund 5 and the City of Waterloo Community Development Department in the amount of $15,000 for repairs to existing single-family owner occupied homes, and authorize the mayor to execute said documents. Number 14, a resolution approving award of bid to Young Plumbing and Heating of Waterloo, Iowa, in the amount of $189,800 in conjunction with the Waste Management Administration HVAC cooling system replacement. And number 15, resolution approving Convention and Visitors Bureau Board recommendations for funding the following hotel motel mini grant application for the Full Count Sports Academy 13 and under and 14 and under major state softball and baseball tournament in the amount of $2,558.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
On number 14, can we get some overview? Last week, we said, we found out that that bid was almost $100,000 more than what we expected, I believe, and we were told that they were probably going to be rejected. And so now here we're approving them. So can we get some info on that for the public?
We went from probably rejected to absolutely accepted. So what happened? What transpired?
Steve Homebrecker, Waste Management Services Director. This has not been, to summarize, not an easy, smooth process, as you can tell. But last week, when I made the comments, I had earlier discussions with the design engineer. We felt that was a prudent thing to do. Following up on it, I've had ongoing discussions from the city attorney, and based on his advice, he's recommended that we go ahead and take those bids. We were going to try another alternate route, and he suggested we take the bids and we will do a contract change order to deduct the problems we had with the bid. Now, the design engineer is here if you have more technical aspect or any other questions, but that's kind of why the about face. It was really based on the comments from the city attorney and trying to deal with this bid in a legal way.
So if we reject the bid, it's illegal.
Well, what we were looking to do is reject the bid and try to get certain components added back as we did take some supplementary bids on certain units that we needed to get in as part of that, which was the original direction between myself and the engineer, and those bids, those quotes were received. However, they were never opened and returned back to their bidders based on the advice of the engineer. This was, or the attorney. This was the appropriate way to go with this bid.
I think a comment, I don't vote, but a comment that I probably would have preferred to hear is that we absolutely have to get this done. Whatever the consultant came up with, we were off on that price, but if this is work that absolutely has to be done, that's crucial. I think folks want to know that, but who's the consultant for this?
Joe Capon, he's here.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Based on the temperature in my office today, it's definitely desirable to get done.
Good evening. My name is Joe Capon. I'm with Capon Consulting Engineers, consulting mechanical electrical firm. My office is located in Hudson. And Mr. Mayor, you're correct. When I first got into this project, certain things were identified, and the further I got into it, the more I saw that things were, wrong and had to be replaced. So there's 2 air handling units in this building. The air conditioner on one of them is dead; it's failed. And so as we dug into it, well, I'll just put it this way: we experienced what you can call, I suppose, scope creep. And I never went back and updated the project cost estimate, is what it amounts to. But everything that's in there, in that price, and that's just the base bid price, there are things that need to be fixed.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a huge shock when it comes, now we're used to things coming in a little bit higher, but then hear that we'll probably reject it, then hearing come back that we absolutely need those items. I mean, that's not giving folks proper notice from something that we heard last week. And I don't know how this vote is going to go, but I would ask if you ever do work again that we're not that far away from where we thought we'd be, because it kind of threw folks for a loop on this situation. But council?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So I'm not an engineer. Did you say you had rebid it? Or opened it back up to discussion? Or, I mean, I'm sorry that your office is hot, but you know, a lot of people work in non-air conditioned offices, my friend, so.
I understand.
Yeah. And I don't know who that's directed at, but.
Well, what I suggested was, you know, there's a state law that says if you're a community of 50,000 or more, there is a threshold where you can get, you know, a dollar amount where you can get competitive quotes, at least 2 competitive quotes. And so that was the route that we went. We received 3 bids, so we went to the 3 bidders and asked for a quote, competitive quote, to just replace a piece of equipment that's failed. And then I wanted to make sure that I reviewed that with the city attorney. And then he came back and said that probably something that we couldn't do.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last couple words. What was that?
That we could not go this alternate route for competitive quotes for the piece of equipment that was failed. So that is just a component of the total that we received in the bid.
Okay.
So I was saying, since it's failed, dead, let's break it out and get the 3 competitive quotes, right, because we would be under the threshold of $51,000.
Okay. And you were told that was not legal? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, pretty much, yes.
Well,
It says you cannot deliberately phase it or break it up to get around the requirement of public bidding and holding a public hearing.
Oh, okay.
So
see what you're saying.
The change is what threw me off. And I would assume everybody's sitting around this semicircle. Yes, that was going somewhere. Let's go.
I've already spoken, so
Mrs. Juwan.
I'm still confused, I'm sorry. But did I understand you both correctly to say that you would recommend that we accept this bid and then you're going to amend it through change orders?
One of the large components was the control system that was a single source, one vendor. And just from a numbers point of view, the engineer's estimate was like $13,000, and the bid for this component came back at $65,000. So that's a component major component we're looking to try to redo, accept the bid from Young's Plumbing and Heating and redo that. And it's our expectation based on Joe's recommendation that number will come drastically down hopefully from the $65,000, and looking at other ways to try to get the controls done, not so single sourced. There's a lot of technicalities, and Joe can explain it.
So it was spec'd at $13K and it actually came back at $65.
Correct.
Okay.
But you're asking us to support 189, thinking you're going to get it down by 50-some thousand.
That was the bid
Is that a trust me issue?
I mean, that was the bid that was on the table, and I don't know if legal needs to. I'm just using their advice to accept the bids the way they come and try to negotiate this component down, which the only legal way I know how to do that is through a change order.
A decrease in change order.
A decreasing change order, absolutely.
Still asking us to
So we
assume
so
that
with
we're gonna
this, there won't be an expectation that council has to approve higher than 189,800. Your belief is once you get into the project and get going, that number will potentially come down.
That's correct.
By $50,000.
Just, it'll come down somewhere. He wouldn't know that, unless you do know that.
No, I don't.
All right, let's go here. Mr. Schimpf had a question on the floor, then we'll go Mr. Morrissey, then Mrs. Klein.
So, Mr. Mayor, could we hear from our city attorney as far as if this got voted down no, then what happens, and how do we get it so that Mr. Homebrecker is not sitting in a warm office all summer at that point?
Not just me, but
well, I'll probably say, and to add to your point before Mr. Zellifer speaks, if we had to pick and choose between where we wanted to have a functioning air system, I would probably say we want it out at that plant just for a bunch of liability reasons and airflow. So, Mr. Zellifer, your name has coming up. Your title has come up a lot.
I've got it. Yeah, Dave Zellifer, City Attorney. I was contacted last week by Mr. Homebrecker, and what we were contacted about was taking this project and dividing it up into thirds, and then bidding those thirds so we could avoid some public bidding problems. And you're not allowed to do that. Iowa Code Chapter 26 does not allow you to do that. So we were faced with the proposition of what we can do. From what I gather from my conversations with the engineer and with Mr. Homebrecker, excuse me, all of the competing bidders went out and had a chance to look at all this and had all the correct information. Young's was the lowest. What we decided to do, and this is legal, I talked to Mrs. Wiedner about it, and we spent quite a bit of time on Thursday about this, trying to figure out how to get this done as quickly as possible and also less than $189,000. Johnson Supply Company, that's what they're called, Johnson.
Johnson Control.
Control, excuse me. We were under the impression, or somebody was, that that there wasn't another control system we could use, and there is. And the engineers know that, and what we were going to do is accept the bid at 189 because Young's was the lowest bidder, but also tell them that they can adjust that with a change order and get a different control system and keep it all within the same bid. And we'd expect them to, because it doesn't have to be them, and we can save a great deal of money. Since everybody had the opportunity to go out and look and bid on this and come up with it, Young's was the lowest, and we feel comfortable going with them. But breaking it up into thirds is illegal under Chapter 26, and for us to do that would just raise a red flag that would be unholy. So thank you.
But what would happen if we vote no?
If you vote no on this today, we start from square one. We'll rebid, and another probably 2 months or so, we'll have something come up. It'll be a little warm and toasty in waste management. So,
all right. So let's go to
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Morrissey.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. So the amount of $189,800 can City Attorney Zellifer, what if you were to interject in there in an amount not to exceed that? Would that change this? Would that?
No, you're free to do that.
Would that be doing in effect what you're hoping that they do, which is a hope?
It sounds like that's, I'm not going to say guaranteed, but from what my conversations with the engineer, I feel fairly confident that we will be less than $189,000.
No, go ahead.
Probably hearing from the council, you may be barely okay with this, so I doubt if they came back with the number. But so why don't you just say that you found out you can get a different control system? We just went all the way from the year over year.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So all three bidders were using the higher price control system?
That's correct. It's single source. The controls were not competitively bid. The project was competitively bid, but all the bidders got the same quote for the controls.
Okay.
And the bids were within 2%.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
So what is your opinion of what we should do? You're the expert here, but it sounds like we're all over the board.
Well, I agree with what the attorney had said, that how we would do it is we would do it via what's called a proposal request. And we'll get prices from 4 different temperature control companies that I know work in our area on a routine basis. They have projects here, so service here and all that would be available. And we would then take the low bid for the controls. And I anticipate it will be a deductive change order.
All right, yes, ma'am.
I have a real problem with everybody coming to the table with bidding on the specs and then changing those specs after we get the bids. And my motto is, in God I trust. Everyone else has to have data.
All right. All right.
I don't like these open-ended things, Sharon.
Madam Clerk, 13, 14, and 15.
Mrs. Klein?
No on the one we just spoke about,
14.
number 14, and yes on the other 2.
Okay. Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes on 13 and 15, no on 14.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes on 13 and 15, no on 14.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes on 13, 15, no on 14.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes on 13, no on 14, yes on 15.
All right, thank you. Back to the drawing board. Number 16. Mr. Schmidt.
Item number 16 is a motion to receive, file, consider, and pass for the second time an ordinance amending the City of Waterloo Code of Ordinances by amending Title 5, Police Regulation, Chapter 2, General Offenses, Section 13, Fireworks, Subsection E, Sales.
Can I get a second, someone?
Second.
A motion's been made with the second. Council?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Well, since last week, a number of things have happened, and I'm going to beg your indulgence on some other issues that have come up, and I hope that the majority or that the city council will see to it to reject this number 16 and vote no on it. First of all, if I might, I want to read a couple of emails that had come to my attention, if that's okay with the council, so that you have this information. I believe that this information is important and crucial to...
You want me to ask him?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, if that's okay. First of all, the first person that had given me some information was somebody that we probably know quite a bit, and we've had conversations with, and that is Mr. Noel Thornsberry. And I'm just going to take a few things out from his email. Very few subjects requiring the council's attention will rise to the level of concern generated by these fireworks issues. You will be dealing with issues surrounding highly volatile and explosive material. One spark in the wrong place in the water and Waterloo could be subjected to a conflagration of significant proportions. In addition to the explosive blast, explosive material sends showers of sparks aloft, which may travel great distances only to start fires in unanticipated locations. There are a plethora of questions that only experts in the fields of insurance and fire prevention or fighting can answer. Getting the answers concerning these issues is not for novices. The presence of a city planning department representative and the city fire marshal should be required at Monday's workshop, as well as having a state representative who is expert in fireworks in general and the state code concerning fireworks specifically in attendance or on a conference call to answer in-depth questions, for example. Can fireworks be stored and sold at gas stations in close proximity to a gas pump islands, and or gas storage tanks, either above or below ground? And I pose that question to all here on council. Do you know the answer to that? If you don't know the answer to it, then why are you voting for this ordinance amendment? Next, what inspections will the city conduct of fireworks sales locations to ensure compliance with the state or city requirements? And it goes into several different, such as. And also, what might be the city's liability for structural fires started for which the wholesaler may not have the requisite insurance to cover the fire loss and or damage. Next is an email from Mr. Tom Haggerty, who states, I have a concern about the council wanting to change the fireworks restriction of where sales of fireworks can be made. When our city does things to prevent fires, the insurance industry takes these safety measures into consideration and will lower our city fire ratings for how much insurance homeowners have to pay to protect their homes from fires, etc. Allowing fireworks sales in only industrial areas was a good safeguard against residential fires, causing home insurance to go down. Allowing fireworks sales everywhere and anywhere panics the insurance companies and our household insurance rates go up. The fire rating for Waterloo is higher than the fire rating for Cedar Falls. Just check it out. Since CF does a lot of fire prevention efforts to prevent fires and their insurance rates are lower. Waterloo City Council members need to stop tweaking these rules for the betterment of someone who sells the stuff that will set my house or others on fire and cause our insurance rates to go sky high. And then finally, as far as the emails, this is one that I hope the council especially heeds. And I think all of you got it. And this is from a Jeremy Terhark, and he's with the Iowa Fireworks Company. He's actually a seller. He's out of the Des Moines area. And he says, hi, Kelly and council members and Attorney Zellifer. I understand you are discussing reversing the zoning that was established in December at tonight's council meeting. As a returning temporary merchant, we canceled, that's Iowa Fireworks, canceled our previous agreements in commercial zones and have already established locations in industrial zones for this season. Those zones where they've established them are in Greyhound Park and the Cattle Congress. My public input as retailer would be that switching zones so quickly would unfairly discriminate on those of us that have already complied with the zoning changes made in December. Furthermore, the zoning restrictions make sense with the use being banned in city limits. Lifting the zoning restrictions would release significant amounts of product to people inside city limits that aren't even allowed to use it. And then he goes on to explain about industrial locations and where other cities, in reading over the other ordinances, the 4 that I'd received from, that I mentioned last week, one of the things I note, almost like in a preamble, is that they say that this ordinance, this amendment to the ordinance, is being created out of public safety concerns. Again, they are moving them. They're making sure that they are in a safer area that, as Chief Treeler said, has water, much more water capabilities than if you would be looking at it in commercial properties. Next, I want to address the issue of insurance. And having talked to somebody who lives in the United States that I've known for years and years and years, who has been involved with insurance for years and years and years, I just want the city council to realize one of the concerns in my discussion, my lengthy discussion that I had with this person who I consider an expert, was that when the city council currently has a restrictive ordinance, it doesn't stop the sales of fireworks in Waterloo, but what it does is it moves it into an area that provides more safety. And this is what this person said. He said, the question is, if we are changing this and opening it up to commercial throughout the city, as well as industrial, but no place that's residential, then aren't we as a city and as a city council opening up ourselves to increased liability exposure because of the action that we're taking? And I can't for a minute believe that we're not. If a fire occurs or if there's an explosion or any kind of incident occurs in any one of these new fireworks vendors that goes up if we approve this ordinance change. The ordinance that we have right now is there for public safety. I don't understand why we would go into doing this. There are other questions that I would like just to address to the city council itself, and ourselves. I just like to see if you can answer these questions. And one of them is, who does the certification check? Does somebody, an expert, come in and do the certification? Does somebody come in and do a compliance check before they get a license? Does anybody on the council know the answer to those two questions? I just ask you. Does anybody? Okay. Do you know?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Does that mean that you're giving me the floor, Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Oh.
These are rhetorical questions. You can look up rhetorical in the dictionary, okay?
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Man, let's be civil.
That's out of line.
Yeah, well, I figured what he was doing was, I'm in the middle of a
I
conversation,
thought you were
Mr.
asking
Mayor.
a question too. So
So did
let's
I.
just keep
So
going,
did I.
sir. And let's move on.
Okay. Next question is, how can required insurance be in place prior to a site inspection? Do we know the answer to that question? Does anybody here know
Mr.
that?
Mayor, is that a real question or is that another one of those rhetorical questions?
It's a rhetorical question, Councilwoman. If inspection for licensing may be required, then why might an inspection possible to ensure compliance with a limited quantity license be there? And I'm asking, does anybody on the council know the answer to that, or have they checked into it before they vote on this? Next, who sells liability insurance knowing that fireworks sales are anticipated? What is self-certification? Has anybody seen the 10 pages of compliance checklists? Has anybody on the council seen that? How can a license be issued subject to a later site inspection? What triggers a limited quantity location inspection? Are inspections farmed out to local fire departments? Can locals refuse? And I believe that Chief Treelor had answered that last week. What footage distance for setbacks of fireworks locations are there from property lines, as we have them right now? And I believe that if one were to look at some of the current, I don't know if anybody on council has asked for Chris Ferguson for any of the current requests from fireworks vendors or not. But if you look at some of the maps, you'll see that they're close by to residential properties. Do you want a fireworks vendor setting up shop next to your house? There is a current one. As a matter of fact, I had somebody from the ward call me explaining that a fireworks vendor is already setting up shop within 100 feet of houses in that residential neighborhood. Again, how do we know that the people that are operating these, if they've been trained, have they been tested, have they passed any kind of thing that has to do, how when we're selling fireworks and we're reading this ordinance, do we understand the difference between first-class and second-class consumer fireworks? How many on council know the difference and what's being sold in each one of those classes? I mean, these are, yeah, they're rhetorical questions. I just would ask the council, please reject this. There is no sense in moving forward on something that creates more safety risk for our city residents. And if I could be indulged one more time with Noel. Noel, do you know?
You address me, and if this is the same question that Noel answered last week, so address me, and I'll decide whether or not we'll have Noel respond. And then after that, do you have any other comments?
Yes, I might. Mr. Mayor, I just like to ask and find out if overlay districts are subject to this, or is it basically commercial property, doesn't make any difference if there's overlay districts in downtown areas or not?
No, is there any?
Noel Anderson, Community Planning Development Director. I guess it would depend on the overlay district you're referring to. The overlay districts, there's several different ones for zoning, the alcohol ones. They all have the minor provisions that would still allow for the outside sales uses for them. And under the minor provisions in some of the overlays, again, it would depend on the location, which district and which site zoning.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So the insurance question to me is probably one of extreme significance to the city of Waterloo. I would hate for the city of Waterloo to be sued because we are not doing due diligence in making sure that we are not putting ourselves at greater liability by opening up sales throughout the city of Waterloo. And I think that's one of the main things that we should be focused on here. The other thing is I understand, and I know that last week I'd asked a question about why are we doing this, and I never got an answer. So I'll give the answer. And the answer is that I believe that certain people are saying that we're going to be sued if we don't change this. And so on one hand, we've got people, Mr. Terhark, and maybe there's others there that have known since December 11th that we have a restrictive zone for where these can be sold. And he took the appropriate action. That was after December 11th. He did due diligence and got his changes made, but we have all these other people here who are not making those changes and did not make those changes, even though they had over 5 months to make those changes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
One other issue still remains is that I do believe that there is a conflict of interest on anybody in city council who either is involved with commercial property downtown where this would open up that area to sales. I believe that if person isn't that, or also if there's any lending institution that might be used by any of these vendors, that those different council persons need to recuse themselves from this vote.
All right, thank you, Mr. Morrissey. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Amos?
No.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin? Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. I once again ask that whether or not you support it or not, we move this forward. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor? Okay.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin? Yes. Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
No.
All right, we'll pick this up next week. Number 17. Anybody?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Schmidt.
Number 17 is a motion to receive, file, and consider and pass for the first time an ordinance amending the 2007 Code of Ordinances of the City of Waterloo, Iowa by amending Chapter 1, Traffic Code of Title 6, Motor Vehicles and Traffic by adding Article 5, Officer Traffic Citation.
Second.
The motion's been made with the second. Council. Madam Clerk. Yes,
Mrs.
sir.
Jewin?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to postpone this until a later date, that later date being after the Human Rights Commission has had a chance to vet this through their racial equity and social justice guidelines. And it would be something that I believe they would make a recommendation after they had meetings and looked this over and had an opportunity to bring back a recommendation. So that's the motion I would like to make on this.
I will second it.
We have a motion and a second to bring this back after the Human Rights Commission continues to work on the racial and social economic justice portion. Is it a question pertaining to the table?
Yes, sir.
Or the postponement?
Has the Human Rights Commission passed that ordinance or passed that policy? I thought it was still in discussion and that we would have some input into that process. No?
Not yet.
Mr. Mayor?
He hasn't made a presentation to the council yet.
Has it been approved by the Human Rights Commission?
It hasn't.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Being the liaison with the Human Rights Commission, this is an issue that the Human Rights Commission has taken up and they are working on. But at the same time, in discussions with Director Funches, this is exactly the kind of thing that the Human Rights Commission would like to have in front of them to look at and to use that tool, which they can use. The resolution has not been introduced in front of the city council for the city council's approval is where that's at. But in talking with Reverend Funches, this would be one of those things where the Human Rights Commission would like to take a look at and discuss amongst themselves, and they could bring back a recommendation at that time. And that's all I'm asking for in this postponement, is they be allowed to do that. I don't believe, Mr. Mayor, if Chief Trelka, is there an urgency or immediacy to do this at this point in time, or could it be postponed, say, for a month or 2 months so that they would have an opportunity to vet this?
All right, so we have a postponement on the floor. Do you have another question about the postponement?
Yeah, the follow-up is I'm a little confused on why this amendment would be in violation of the Human Rights Commission. What would their issue be with this?
Well, I'm not saying it would be in violation. What I'm saying and suggesting is that we give the Human Rights Commission their due in being able to take a look at this and to see if they have any issues with it. And I had talked with Mr. Mayor, if we could have Chief Trelka weigh in on this, I would appreciate it.
Chief Trelka, have you, and then after that, we'll go to Mrs. Klein.
It's not a bad policy, but quite frankly, it's at the council's pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.
I just can't figure out how in the world it would have anything to do with Mr. Funch's department. I just can't. It's traffic tickets.
Right. There's a small portion when you're talking about the over-proliferation or profiling of particular areas. The unique one is that this doesn't necessarily move into traffic violations or where somebody's driving record is impacted, correct? So that's where everything that we do, we need to make sure that it doesn't improperly impact someone with regards to profiling, with regards to giving more tickets to one place. But, so this one though.
We're just taking tickets we normally wrote and diverting the income. We're not starting tickets or
Right.
originating them.
So this is just a reading tonight, but we have a motion to postpone on the table right now. So we need to vote on that. Madam Clerk?
Mrs. Jewin?
No.
Mr. Jacobs?
No.
Mr. Morrissey?
Yes.
Mr. Schimpf?
No.
Mrs. Klein?
No.
Mr. Amos?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
All right, thank you. So we have a
Mr. Mayor,
motion on
make
the
a
floor.
motion to suspend the rules.
We got to vote on the actual first time. That was just
Oh,
for the
I'm sorry, that was-
postponement.
Mr. Mayor.
So,
I'm sorry. I
Oh.
lost track.
Am I got the floor?
yes, sir.
I just wanted to say that I think we did talk about last week when we talked about this, about the Administrative Appeals Board, was having a member from the Human Rights Commission actually on that board. Is that correct or accurate, or what would happen on the board?
Right. That part is true. The portion that we're talking about is to make sure that any ordinance, anything prior to it getting to that point meets the checklist of racial equality, to make sure even before it gets to that, because you can have 6 votes on a board,
Sure.
but it's even before it gets to that point.
And I understand that. I just want to make sure from our appeals board
Yep.
that there will be someone present from that
Right.
committee.
Madam Clerk,
Mr.
well,
Jac-
we need a motion to suspend the rules.
Well,
No, we
haven't
didn't even vote on the
that
first one.
Oh.
My mistake. Yep, sorry about that.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
No.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
A motion's been made with the second. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Schimpf?
Yes.
Mrs. Klein?
Yes.
Mr. Amos?
No.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Mrs. Jewin?
No.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I get the vote.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Jacobs.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion been
trying
made
to
with the
speed it
second.
up.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
What was that?